Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning and welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, thousands of women lured into unnecessary and expensive surgeries to remove pelvic mesh. We explore the elaborate legal and medical scam with the author of the new book, The Pain Brokers. Then, they've been called the house band for the United Nations. We talk to the vocalist for the multilingual, multicultural band, Pink Martini, and how the ancient secrets of the charioteer continue to impress upon modern cosmologists. We talk to our resident spaceman about awry. Join the conversation. Give us a call on air at 904-549-2937 or go to firstcoastconnect.org to find all the ways to connect with us. Stick around. We'll be back right after the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. President Trump celebrated economic progress in his State of the Union speech last night, but as NPR's Scott Horsley reports, many aren't buying his sales pitch.
President Trump talked as if there had been an economic turnaround on his watch, but official statistics tell a different story. Economic growth was slower during Trump's first year back in office than it was during the final year of the Biden administration. Job growth was much slower, and inflation has mostly moved sideways, with Trump's own tariffs contributing to higher prices of some imports. The president highlighted some things that have gotten cheaper, notably eggs and gasoline, but the overall cost of living continues to climb. That's weighing on the president's approval rating. In the latest NPR PBS News Marist poll, 6 in 10 Americans say the country's worse off now than it was a year ago. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
Virginia's Governor Abigail Spanberger delivered the Democratic response, offering a sharply different take on the health of the country's economy from President Trump's. Spanberger says American families are struggling under his policies.
As I campaigned for governor last year, I traveled to every corner of Virginia, and I heard the same pressing concern everywhere. Costs are too high in housing, healthcare, energy, and childcare. And I know these same conversations are being had all across this country.
And in a speech from historic colonial Williamsburg, Virginia, she says Trump is pitting Americans against each other, and she also attacked immigration officer tactics, calling Trump reckless. Paramount is raising its offer for Warner Brothers Discovery, which rejected a rival bid from Netflix. NPR's David Folkenflik has more.
Warner owns HBO Max, HBO, Warner Brothers Studios, the DC Comics franchises, and cable channels including CNN and Discovery. Netflix won over Warner with a bid for the TV and movie studios, the streaming platforms and intellectual property, but not the cable channels, in a deal worth $83 billion. Paramount chief David Ellison started the ball rolling by making a series of unsolicited bids for Warner. He now promises to pay $31 per share, $1 more than his last offer. The previous deal included debt and was valued at about $108 billion. Ellison has made other concessions, too. Warner has not yet decided the Paramount deal is preferable, but if it does, Netflix will have 4 days to make a counteroffer. A shareholder vote is planned for March. David Folkenflik, NPR News.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is meeting Chinese leaders pressing for fairer trade rules and more help in ending the war in Ukraine. Merz says global crises, including the war in Ukraine, can't be settled without Beijing. European governments say China hasn't pushed Russia hard enough to end its war, but Beijing says it's staying impartial in the conflict. You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. Last call will soon come later for some bars in the downtown Jacksonville area. The city council gave final approval last night to an ordinance allowing some bars to serve alcohol until 3 in the morning. The ordinance was promoted as an economic driver for downtown area bars and restaurants. It would only allow establishments in 3 areas of downtown to stay open later. Those areas are considered the North Core, Central Core, and Sports and Entertainment District, according to news partners at News 4 Jax. The measure was approved 17-1. Florida Chief Financial Officer Blaise Ingoglia says both he and Governor Ron DeSantis want to get rid of property taxes on homesteaded properties. He just doesn't think it'll happen in the next few weeks.
Will that get through the legislature? No. I think it's clear at this point it's not going to go through the legislature. I think what is also clear is that nothing is going to get done in this legislature, and we're going to do it in a special session.
Speaking to business people in Tallahassee yesterday, Ingoglia also pledged to continue his campaign to audit the state's cities and counties for what he called wasteful spending. We'll start to warm up today here in Northeast Florida. Highs will reach the lower 70s inland, upper 60s along the coast. It'll be dry as well. Overnight temperatures drop into the 40s and 50s. A cold front approaches from the northwest tomorrow, and ahead of that front, it'll be breezy and warm. Highs will eventually rise into the upper 70s to lower 80s by Friday, and there is some rain in the forecast on Friday.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Bayer. Bayer is dedicated to delivering breakthroughs that save lives and feed the world using the scientific process. Learn more at sciencedelivers.com. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Surgical patients caught in a lawsuit factory. Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, we meet the author of an investigation into the victims of a multi-million-dollar scam involving doctors, lawyers, and the increasingly lucrative medical debt market. Later in the program, cocktail music set to a 1960s beat. The featured vocalist of Pink Martini joins us ahead of the band's Friday performance in Jacksonville. But first, the use of surgical mesh proved painful and problematic for hundreds of thousands of women before its recall several years ago. But for women used as pawns in the lawsuits that followed, the litigation mesh mill was far more punishing. Elizabeth Chamblee Burch is a law professor at the University of Georgia and author of The Pain Brokers: How Con Men, Call Centers, and Rogue Doctors Fuel America's Lawsuit Factory. She joins us now via video. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Elizabeth, the story you tell has a great deal of legal and medical complexity, but you managed to keep the storyline very clear by telling it through the experience of 3 women. And so I'm going to follow your lead. I'm going to ask you to begin by telling us about the phone call that Sharon Gore got shortly before Thanksgiving in 2013.
Sure. So imagine that you are in your kitchen, you're getting ready for Thanksgiving, you have family coming over, and you get a call, and the caller on the other end of the line knows an inordinate amount of information about you. They know your name, they know your birth date, they know the date that you had mesh implanted, they know the name of your doctor, the name of your hospital. And so all of a sudden, something that might set off bells as a scam suddenly feels much more legitimate because they have all of this information about you. And then they tell you that you have a ticking time bomb in you. And if you don't fly to South Florida and have it removed within 2 weeks, then you are going to die. So Sharon actually thought that this was a phone call from Boston Scientific, which was the maker of her medical device. And she thought that Boston Scientific was planning to fly her to South Florida to have the mesh removed, just like you might get a postcard in the mail about a car part that's been recalled. Hey, come by, we're going to fix this up for you.
And so this call that she got, in addition to knowing the date of her surgery and, her personal details, it actually knew her medical history to the extent of symptoms that she was experiencing that may have been related to this surgical mesh that was used in so many cases, including pain that she was having, numbness. I mean, this was a truly intimate level of detail that these people had in their hands. How did they get this information?
Yeah, so as our medical records get outsourced to India for records keeping through our private health insurance companies, some of those Indian call centers realized that they were sitting on what is essentially a mass tort gold mine. They knew the patient codes, so they could tell exactly who had mesh. They knew exactly who to call and exactly when they had the mesh implanted. So it did make it seem far more legitimate. And it's a scam that could easily happen today. Just a few weeks ago, Epic Systems, which owns most of our private insurance information, filed a lawsuit against a company called Health Gorilla. And they allege that Health Gorilla is breaching our data and that they are selling our data to none other than mass tort plaintiffs' lawyers.
So it's probably a good moment to explain some of the things that we're talking about. We mentioned mesh. There was a real problem with mesh. This is not a fiction, even though what you write about is a huge scam based on it. Tell us about how this was used, why it started to be used in women, and why it failed in many cases when it was used in women.
So mesh is a plastic weave. I mean, picture like a friendship bracelet, for example, made out of fishing line. It's a plastic weave. It was originally used to treat men's hernias. It's problematic there. There are a number of lawsuits over hernia cases as well. But mesh device makers decided, hey, if it's good enough for men's abs, it must work well in other areas of the body. And so they approved it for use in the pelvis area for women. They didn't have to go through separate FDA approval. They didn't have to have any sort of clinical trials. And it turns out that when you put it in a very porous part of the body, like the woman's vagina, it can unravel and pierce other organs. And so eventually mesh was recalled for use in pelvic organ prolapse. It is still being used somewhat controversially for stress urinary incontinence.
And so when this was failing, sometimes it was eroding, it was damaging other organs, it was causing some women really excruciating pain, but not everybody had a problem with it. And I believe that you report that Sharon Gore, the woman, one of these three women you follow through this process, wasn't even aware that she had surgical mesh inside her body.
Right. So she had a partial hysterectomy. And as part of that partial hysterectomy, the doctor made sort of a split-second decision and said, gosh, we need to use mesh to repair this. And so, it was part of the consents that she signed pre-surgery, but it wasn't as if he had counseled her on it. He talked to her about it in the post-surgical haze. And when she got these phone calls, she went to her husband and said, hey, do you remember anything about mesh when I had my surgery? And, everyone sort of racks their mind because those are such chaotic times for people. And he remembered a little bit about it, but didn't really know much. And that by that time, her OBGYN had retired. So there wasn't really anyone that she could call. She didn't go regularly because she no longer had a cervix. So she didn't really have an opportunity to get a second opinion like you might hope.
I want to also define this term mass tort because you mentioned it. These are large scale forms of litigation. Can you explain to us how a mass tort is different, say, from what we think of as a class action lawsuit and how it's used when it comes to medical malpractice?
Sure. So let me go back one step further. A tort is a harm. It's like a punch or a kick. It's not a layer cake. That's a tort with an E. A mass tort is something that happens to a lot of people in similar ways. So the BP oil spill is probably very familiar to Jacksonville folks. Same sort of thing with the opioid epidemic. These are different than class actions. Class actions tend to be oftentimes over small scale harms. So you're overcharged $3 at the ATM, for instance. You're not going to walk into a lawyer's office and be able to sue over those $3. So a class action makes it possible to bring those kinds of lawsuits so that companies aren't able to harm Americans through these little pinpricks. It makes it economically viable for attorneys to bring. But the difference mainly when we have a class action is that there are all kinds of rules. So there is a federal rule of civil procedure that requires all kinds of due process checklists when there is a class action. There are safeguards in place. The judge has to make sure that any sort of settlement is fair, reasonable, and adequate. And there are similar problems, of course, in the mass tort space, but there are no rules. So when I talk to my students about it, I explain to them that it's almost like the Wild West of litigation, that you have all the same problems that you have in the class action context, but you don't have any of the safeguards.
And so part of the problem, as you report in the Pain Brokers, is that these cases, because of the scale of them, are often shunted into a single court or court system with somebody supervising. And so plaintiffs all over the country may have an attorney in name, but usually they're being represented by somebody several states away that they've never met. And that person who's handling the case and all of the various other people may not really regard them necessarily as individual clients as much as just part of this mass spreadsheet, really, that they're representing.
Absolutely. I mean, depending on your age, I think your cultural references might be different. But, when I think about entering a court, and I think a lot of people feel the same way, they think they're going to have their Perry Mason or their Matlock moment, or, pick maybe the good wife, whatever it might be. But they think they're going to walk into court, they're going to have an attorney who represents them at trial, and they're going to be able to speak truth to power like a mesh manufacturer. And instead, what happens in the mass tort space, there were over 100,000 of these cases pending in West Virginia. And so you can't have 100,000 plus trials. It's just simply not possible. And so a lot of the women who were caught up in this morass felt like they were simply numbers on a spreadsheet, not people with a harm and a story that they wanted to tell in front of a jury, even though they were people with harms that they wanted to tell in front of a jury. So it's a very different kind of system than what we expect to encounter.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about a new book called The Pain Brokers. We're talking to its author, Elizabeth Chamblee Burch. This is a book about the mesh mill, the medical and legal morass that patients found themselves caught in. If you've been part of any mass tort liability case or you have questions, you can reach us at 904-549-2937, or you can email First Coast Connect, wjct.org. You can also go to firstcoastconnect.org and find all the ways to connect with us. So you talk about the problems with this system, Elizabeth, and one of the reasons that you decided to write this book is you have been researching and writing about mass torts for many, many years. As a law professor and a chair at the University of Georgia, this is not a new problem, but you had discovered in the course of your research that the people who go through this system are wildly unsatisfied with the results, that fewer than 2% in these cases of the women involved in these surgical mesh lawsuits felt like they'd accomplished what they'd wanted to. And you wanted to dig into why that was happening, why that dissatisfaction rate was so high, but also communicate that to the broader public.
Absolutely. So I did a procedural justice study where I began to talk with victims of mass torts, not just about the tort itself, but mostly about how they felt like they had been treated in the process by their lawyers, by the judge. And what I heard just made me mad. They felt like they were not being heard. They felt like a number on a spreadsheet. And so I went back to school. I went back and got an MFA in narrative nonfiction from the University of Georgia's journalism school. And I tried to figure out, how do I tell this story in a much broader scale? And I was about a month and a half into my MFA program when I got a call from the whistleblower who was at the heart of the Pain Brokers. And the story that he told me was so fantastical that you couldn't even believe it, that it was possibly true. And yet, the more I began to dig and the more I began to investigate, the more I realized that it is absolutely true and it is absolutely happening.
And we should say that this book is written, it truly is a page turner. It is written like a mystery. It is gripping throughout. But let's get into the story of what exactly was transpiring. We mentioned that these women had this surgical mesh. They received these phone calls. They didn't know from who or where, but it had all kinds of information telling them, you need to have surgery immediately to get this out of your body. It could kill you. What was going on behind the scenes? Who all were the players involved?
Yeah, so there were several players involved. Ron LaSorsa was the whistleblower who reached out to me years later. Vince Chabra was one of the kingpins. He had been arrested in the early 2000s and pled guilty to running an online pill mill. He served 30 months in federal prison. When he got out, he then breached the terms of his probation because he was running a puppy mill that also included an online pharmacy. So he went back to jail. So he was one of the big players. Blake Barber was the middleman in all of this. So essentially what happened is that when the women got the phone calls urging them to fly down to South Florida, they then had to take out a DocuSign packet. So just like you would sign a HIPAA form or a consent to surgery, that's what they thought this was. And DocuSign had been programmed to auto-populate their signature throughout. So even though it looks like they're signing all of these individual pages with their initials, they're in fact not. It skips directly to the signature page, so they don't realize that in addition to these HIPAA forms and to these consent forms, they are taking out a lien against their future settlement proceeds, as well as signing an attorney-client retainer agreement. And so the lien meant that a procedure that if they had actually needed it, it would have cost them probably from insurance between $800 and $1,000, that this lien was actually between $69,000 and up to $150,000 against their future settlement proceeds. So they were flown down to South Florida. They were taken to an outpatient clinic that was run by chiropractors, or in some cases was next to a strip mall. And there was a doctor there who took these meshes out at a very rapid clip. So ordinarily, mesh can take between 7 and 8 hours to extract. It's meant to go in, it's meant to form scar tissue, and that scar tissue is what forms that sort of protective hammock underneath those organs. And it's sort of like rebar and concrete. It's meant to go in, it's never meant to come out. And yet these doctors, one of them actually bragged to me that she had ripped out meshes in 15 minutes a pop. And as you can imagine, certainly that does not help the women. And in this case, the women were left incontinent. One of the women at the heart of the book has been told that there's literally nothing else that they can do for her. So she is left permanently wearing diapers.
And I want to get more into those stories, but part of the process that you mentioned is Blake Barber, and his role, as you describe it, is essentially to sort of jack up the value of these plaintiffs to make sure that they are worth as much as possible in this litigation. And in order to do that, he has to basically make sure that their claim is as valuable as possible. Surgery becomes essential in that case. And so he's actually, persuading people who may not need surgery to have it.
Right. So there's a lot of finger pointing that happens between Blake Barber's organization, which was called Surgical Assistance, and the call center, which was deceptively named Law Firm Headquarters. So a lot of the women actually thought that they weren't talking to a call center, they were talking to their lawyer's office. And there was a lot of persuading that went on. So if a woman was to say, well, I probably need to, to check with my doctor before I do this, they would have a couple different tactics. They would say, well, do you trust the doctors in your area? And a lot of the women felt like their pain had been dismissed by their own doctors. They didn't feel like they were being adequately heard. If they said, yes, I do trust my doctor, then they would shift and they would say, well, this is something relatively new. There's only a few doctors in the country who are able to perform this surgery. Not most people know about it yet, but don't worry, we're going to hook you up with the best of the best, and we're going to fly you down to South Florida so that you can see those doctors who know how to remove mesh.
And just a little bit of a warning for people who don't like to talk about medical things. You mentioned that the doctors were performing these surgeries at an astonishing pace. And the way that you describe it in the book, it sounds almost like trying to take the paper out of paper mache. It is not an easy surgery. But whereas you report that it often takes 6 to 7 hours, there was one doctor that you report did 5 in a day. Mm-hmm. So perhaps not surprising that the outcomes for these women were less than optimal.
That's right. Most of the doctors who were working at these types of centers, and there were quite a few across the country, several of whom were in Florida, one of whom I know was here in Georgia, they were performing at least 5 a day, and they were getting kickbacks from the funder. So, they were paying the funder essentially for patients. And they were able to skirt around the edges of anti-kickback laws that are included in Medicaid and Medicare and private health insurance because they were only taking these third-party liens. So they refused to take any kind of private insurance or Medicaid or Medicare.
We're talking about the new book, The Pain Brokers, with its author. If you would like to reach us, you can call 904-549-2937. We have a call from Terry in downtown Jacksonville. Good morning, Terry. Go ahead.
Hi, Ann. Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to say I read the book. I couldn't put it down. It is amazing. What a project. But I did want to ask, were you just horrified at the lack of consequences for all of the players that contributed to these tragedies? And second, do you hope that there's going to be some legislation to outlaw this behavior?
It's a good question and a little bit of a spoiler alert, I guess. I mean, there are some consequences that come out of this. But to Terry's question, you do have hopes for reforms.
I do have hopes for reforms. A lot of this is a failure to prosecute the laws on the books. So there are some areas that we could close up in terms of loopholes. I just mentioned one of them, which is that we don't have any sort of anti-kickback statute that is included in third-party litigation funding. So third-party litigation funding is meant to actually help plaintiffs. The whole point of it is to make sure that plaintiffs don't have to settle on the cheap because they are waiting for a settlement years down the road and they need money today for rent or groceries or something like that. But it has become essentially like payday lending or one of these types of pawn shops. And so, thinking about ways that we can close the loopholes and try to regulate that industry, particularly when it comes to medical liens, I think is an important part of this. And also to answer your question, yes, I am outraged at the lack of consequences for people in this book. And, that's one of the reasons that it's so important for me to talk to everybody about this, because many of these people are still out there and many of them are able to do the exact same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I should say I looked up some of the individuals involved and, some of them are still practicing medicine. The names are out there and certainly Googleable, the work that they're doing. We also have a question from Daryl on Facebook asking, did this also happen in other countries that do not have for-profit healthcare systems like Canada, England, and Australia? It's a good question. I mean, are we uniquely vulnerable because of the way that we run our healthcare system?
Mesh has been a problem internationally. So the mesh itself has been the subject of lots of litigation worldwide. The scam that I write about, I think, may be uniquely American. I certainly haven't heard about it happening in other countries, but I also haven't researched whether it's happening in other countries. So I don't want to say for certain whether that is or isn't true.
Okay. In terms of the impacts, one of the women that you profile, and we should say that the women who participated in this story and in this litigation were very brave. This is a surgery, and the outcomes of this surgery can be life-changing, but also can be very shameful for women to live with. Things like really severe incontinence. One of the women that you write about, Jerry, her story was particularly heartbreaking, not only because she is now living with sort of the most severe form of that, but because of how she got ensnared in this in the first place, from a place of real economic vulnerability and sort of precarity in her life. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Sure. And I'll back up just a little bit and say that, the reason that I chose these three women is that they are all very different. They're from different states. They have different levels of education, and they're from different socioeconomic classes. So Sharon, who I talked about earlier, has a master's degree. She lives in South Carolina. Jerry has a 10th grade education. She lives in Benton, Arkansas. She is particularly vulnerable. She was living with her daughter at the time and helping to take care of her grandchildren. When she got the phone call from Yolanda, she was lying on the bed with her granddaughter, and she made the mistake of answering the phone on speakerphone. And so her granddaughter overheard you have a ticking time bomb in you, you're going to die, and then became an unwitting participant in urging her grandmother to fly to South Florida, thinking that that was the only way to help her, and that was the only way that she was going to be able to keep her grandmother in her life.
This is a woman you report who is living off of $750 a month in disability benefits before the surgery. This trip to Florida was her first airplane ride. So, I mean, incredibly economically constrained. And her recovery was just a terrible thing to read about. I mean, like most of these women, there was not a hospital that they're recovering in. They're basically sent to a nearby hotel, flown home. It sounds like in the case of Jerry, far too soon to be fully recovered. She was having all kinds of medical problems in the days and months after her surgery. So today, when you are reaching out to her and to the other women? How forthcoming are they? How willing are they to participate in a book like this?
It took some time. They have been scammed before, and they were rightfully suspicious of me and of talking with me. This is something that, people don't talk about. You can imagine, I think we've all, if you have a cold, you'll say, yeah, I've got to stay home. I have a cold. But if you have diarrhea or if you have incontinence, you're not going to tell people that you have to stay home for that reason. So it is a very sensitive topic to talk with people about. And it took a number of years for me to gain their trust and to get to know them. I flew to see them in their own homes, their own home states, so that I could get a sense as to who they are. And so for Jerry, I went and visited her and her grandson at the Capri Inn in Benton, Arkansas, which is a long stay motel. And, I really enjoyed getting to know both of them and continue to stay in touch with all of the people who are at the heart of this book.
We are getting some more calls, but I want to just briefly talk about the money, because we've talked about the medical fallout for these women. The lead plaintiffs in this case got hundreds of millions of dollars. The plaintiffs' lawyers got billions of dollars, many of them. I mean, not individually, but collectively. But tell us about what the women got.
On average, the average mesh settlement was $40,000. Now, if you took a case to trial, then oftentimes you stood to get millions. But the average mesh settlement was only $40,000. And in Sharon's case, that was way less than what she owed to these litigation funders. And so after she accepted her settlement and got some of the paltry settlement money that she was owed, she then got a letter in the mail from Banyan Finance saying, you owe us X amount of dollars. If you don't pay immediately, we're coming after your house. And so, it was an instance where oftentimes the settlement doesn't cover the lien. And in some instances, these lien holders actually went after the women for the money.
We have a call from Denise in Mayport Village. Good morning, Denise. Go ahead.
Hi. Do you surmise that these women were brought to Florida for their surgery because the laws in Florida tend to protect doctors from malpractice? Or was it just simply a case of that's where the doctors were who were party to this scam?
Good question, Denise.
Yeah, I think it's more of a case of that's where the call center was and that's where these middlemen were, and that they had connections to doctors who were willing to take mesh out at a rapid clip, whereas other doctors around the world or around the country might not be. But certainly Florida was not the only place that this happened. There were doctors in Georgia. I believe there was a doctor in Texas who was doing this as well. They were recruiting doctors in California, although I don't know that those worked out. So they were certainly looking to build out a network of these doctors who were happy to remove mesh very quickly under unusual circumstances.
In terms of, there are some heroes in this book, at least one, maybe two. Tell us about the attorney that finally helped bring some justice for these three women at least.
So J.R. Baxter is a young lawyer. He had recently graduated from the University of Arkansas. He had summered with one of these big law firms that he calls a tall building firm. And he decided that there were too many egos in big law for him and that he was going to join his dad's one-stop shop in Benton, Arkansas. His dad was a solo practitioner. He was working out of his brick ranch house at the time. Jerry Plummer wandered in through the garage because the front door was broken. And she goes into the house and, you can picture all the taxidermy on the wall. There's all these, some of them jokingly call it the dead animal room. And Ray Baxter has this, huge 500-pound stuffed grizzly bear that is behind his desk. And so JR actually comes to represent the three women at the heart of the book, largely kicked off by Jerry Plummer. So Jerry comes in and she begins to tell them this story, and JR's eyebrow gets a little bit raised when she says that she has to fly down to South Florida to do this. So he calls around, he calls some of the other lawyers that he knows that are representing mesh plaintiffs and says, do they have to fly to South Florida to have this done? And they said, no, you can have it done here in Little Rock. And so at that point, he begins to dig. And he comes across Barbara Bennis's work. So Barbara Bennis is the other protagonist in the book. She is representing one of these mesh manufacturers. And she actually realizes that something is amiss when she begins to see these really high inflated damage numbers. And she's also getting phone calls from women who are calling the medical device maker as well as their doctors saying, how are all of these people getting my information? I haven't told another living soul, not even my husband, that I have this mesh implanted. And yet I'm getting these phone calls where they know everything about me. What has happened? What have you done with my data?
And so that leads him to basically this trail. And eventually he's able to put together the pieces of this puzzle in an extraordinary way that people previous to him were not. Just briefly, because we've only got a short minute left here, you are also keeping an eye on future lawsuits. We're starting to see more, for instance, against the GLP-1 type drugs. What would you like to see done to prevent this from happening in future cases?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a quick 30-second fix. It's a really complicated system. It's one of those instances where you close one gap and it's like a half inflated balloon and it will puff up in the other. But I think the main takeaway for us and for everyday Americans is to just be aware of this dark economy where our private data becomes disposable, to be aware that these types of scams are becoming ever more sophisticated, and that if something sounds strange, if there's some urgency to it or they have information that you don't know why they have it, to sort of listen to that gut instinct and to get those sorts of second opinions to make sure that this is legitimate and this is something that actually needs to take place.
Her book is called The Pain Brokers. Elizabeth Chamblee Burch, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Up next, if the UN had a house band in 1962, that's the sound of the globetrotting orchestra Pink Martini. We talked to the band's guest vocalist ahead of their upcoming Jacksonville show. Welcome back. Well, the multicultural sounds of the globetrotting mini orchestra known as Pink Martini take center stage in Jacksonville this Friday at the Florida Theater. Here to tell us about it is singer, songwriter, actress, and author Storm Large, the band's featured vocalist. Storm, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you. I'm psyched to get there.
We're excited to have you. You have been performing now with the band since 2011. How did you first connect with Pink Martini?
Well, Thomas and China and I had been friends for years, just sort of performing, and Thomas and I had collaborated together several times doing mostly political fundraisers and nonprofit work. And then when China Forbes injured her vocal cords, they asked me to fill in, and that was 15 years ago. I didn't want to do it. I really didn't want to do it. They really had to do some convincing, but I no regrets. I'm so happy.
And you, obviously came to this band with a huge musical resume. You performed in clubs in San Francisco all through the 90s. You have performed with bands that have a range of sound, including, you've really got some punk rock bona fides. You've performed just an enormous sound variety. You've performed on America's Got Talent, where you got an amazing reception. Tell us just about your kind of the variety, where your musical heart is, what inspires you?
What inspires me is authenticity, stuff that is real. I call myself a genre fluid artist. Everything excites me, like jazz, punk rock, heavy metal, hip hop, slam poetry, classical. It just I can't really put my finger on exactly what it is that gets my juices flowing, but it's mostly things that are really authentic. I don't like things that are too manufactured. like some pop music that sounds like it was written by a focus group from Pepsi Cola. I can't do it. But there's some pop music, like there's some K-pop stuff that's super, super commercial, but I'm really moved and excited by it. So I don't know. I'm a bit of a tramp, I guess.
Well, fair to say the band is too. Pink Martini's sound, I've heard it described as if the UN had a house band, that this would be it.
Yep.
And so you're tasked not only with performing this enormous variety of genres, musical genre, but you're also singing in foreign languages very proficiently. I would like to take a little listen to one of the songs that you perform in Italian, and then I want to come back and talk about just how you hone that particular skill of performing so well and so fluently in another language.
Okay.
Una mattina mi son svegliato, hey! So bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Una mattina mi son svegliato e ho trovato l'invasor. Mi parteggiano, portami via, hey! Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Partigiano, portami via, che mi sento di morire.
All right, so it is a electric performance, so full of energy, and the band is just incredible. But how do you prepare to do that? Do you do some training to kind of get your intonation and your inflection so correct?
With some languages, yes. Not with the Romance languages, but with Russian, with Persian, with Arabic, Japanese, Cantonese, the ones that are very far from my culture. Thomas usually provides me with a coach, and I get phonetics. I get to sound it out. I get different translations of it, and but the thing is, with singers, my theory is that singers have a better ear for language. We're more adept at language because we learn by listening. We learn songs by listening, and we teach children, the alphabet and different lessons using catchy melodies. So the melody is sort of the treat your brain gets for remembering a thing. And so I don't know, I've just grown up listening and learning music, and so language it comes second nature to me, especially if it's a really good song.
And you've mentioned Thomas a couple of times. That's Thomas Lauderdale. He's the founder of Pink Martini. But this is a group that has actually also featured some recurring guest vocalists. You mentioned China Forbes, but also yes. Ari Shapiro, the former host of NPR's All Things Considered. How does the band adapt to having such different vocalists contribute to its sound?
Oh, I don't think the band needs to adapt at all. I think the band, for a long, long time, it was just China Forbes was the only singer. But I believe that the band, it really was made for a rotating cast because it's such a big band and it has such a broad spectrum of cultural influences, and it's such a party on stage, and everybody in their own right is a soloist in Pink Martini. They're all incredible musicians, so it just makes sense that there'll be several different singers and guest singers in a night, instead of just a band with a singer. I don't know. It's very inclusive. Let's just say. I feel like we were made for that. And Ari Shapiro is one of the most annoyingly perfect people you've ever met. He's so handsome and his voice is so good. He's a gourmet. He's a gardener. He's insane, and his handwriting looks like a font. I swear to God, he's incredible. He's so much fun to tour with.
Much to envy. You also almost took a detour to being a chef, a professional chef at one point in your career. You kind of got drawn back into music.
Yes.
But tell us a little bit about that near trajectory. I mean, you obviously you maybe were ready to shift and then have really gotten traction so much again with your vocal performance. And we should say you were featured on the CBS show Rockstar Supernova and almost at the final, but have accrued just an enormous fan base from that experience.
Oh yeah. That was really fun. That was early days of reality TV. It's really different now, it seems. I mean, reality TV is, I mean, it is what it is, but it was, Rockstar was a lot of fun. But in terms of being a chef, I almost quit after I'd been, like you said, been club singing and theater singing and guest singing in the 90s in the Bay Area and around California. After September 11th, everything, I mean, you know, the world changed. And I kind of thought, this is so vapid, this is so shallow. Everybody's like, oh, you got to get a record deal, you need to write a hit song, you need to lose weight, you need to lie about your age, you need to change your name. You know, the whole industry thing. And I was like, you know, I want to be more of service to my fellow man. I want to be useful. I want to like do like a Meals on Wheels or teaching. I was a runaway. I had a pretty rough childhood. I was like, I want to teach like homeless moms or like how to cook healthy meals using SNAP benefits, that kind of thing. And so I was going to go to the Culinary Institute. And then to pay for the Culinary Institute, I was working at a bar where the owner of the bar was a huge fan. And he just kept bugging me. When are you going to sing at my club? I'm like, I don't do that anymore. And then one night he's like, hey, you know, this band canceled. Can you do anything? And so I was like, all right, I'll do it as a favor. And then months into it, I was like, this is a service. I just filled this club. I'm making these people happy. I'm making money for all the bartenders. I'm creating a community, and that's powerful. And so also culinary school was incredibly expensive. I was still a really good cook. But I am untrained. So if I cook for you, you're taking your life into your own hands, but I am awesome.
Yeah, well, it's innate as opposed to something that you've learned through school, which I'm sure makes it better. You know, you alluded a little bit to your childhood. You actually wrote a memoir called Crazy Enough. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write that, what you were hoping people glean from your experiences?
I didn't want to write it. I got kind of bamboozled. I wrote a play. It was a one-woman show called Crazy Enough. And then a friend of mine got a hold of my early script and sent it to his literary agent. And then they just started hounding me for a book proposal. And they're like, this is a book, you got to write it. And so I wrote a book proposal to get them off my back. And then I got a deal. Then I got a contract from Simon & Schuster. And then I had to do it. And I'm honored and amazed that happened. I'm working on another book now, but I'm like barely educated. Anyway, the story is just basically about growing up with a mentally ill parent and being exactly like her and being told you're exactly like your mother. And my mother was very suicidal, very traumatized by her childhood. And one of her doctors, when I was around 9 years old, told me very flippantly, casually, that yes, I was going to end up exactly like my mom. And so I panicked and went into my life determined to not be like her, and doing the craziest, most outrageous things to not be like her, only to find that I am a lot like her, and that, spoiler alert, I live at the end, and I realize that being kind of a little bit crazy is a good thing, because the world is absolutely nuts, as we have come to learn.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a really, great life story. I think the work you're doing right now is so transformative for audiences and so enjoyable for people. And I know that your performance at the Florida Theater will be no exception. Anything in particular you want people to be looking for on this tour from your performance or from the band?
Just keep in mind, a lot of Pink Martini, old school Pink Martini fans know this, but if you're bringing people who are new, or if you're new and you're curious about coming and enjoying the band for the first time, keep in mind that you're part of the show. We don't humiliate you, or we don't like try to bring people on stage and embarrass them or anything like that, but the audience is 1000% part of the show, because it's a party. it's a party. And sometimes people get up on stage and they dance and they sing songs with us. If they know it, if they're comfortable doing it, people get up in the aisles and they dance. It isn't a situation where you come to a show and you sit in a seat, you look up to a stage and there's people there doing stuff. You are all part of it. And it's a very heart forward experience without being cringy,
It is a participatory party.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
And you're all invited.
Well, thank you so much for doing this today. Pink Martini performs at the Florida Theater Friday, February 27th. Tickets at floridatheater.com. We also have a link on our website. It's great to talk to you. Thanks so much for doing this. Storm Large, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right, you do the same.
Stay warm.
Yes, you do the same. We'll be back in just a minute.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Highway, hospital, home, work. Where injuries happen can make a difference in the law and the outcome.
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com. Here Tomorrow provides no-cost, no-wait suicide prevention services in our community. The nonprofit will host its 5-year celebration, A Night of Promise, on March 21st. Tickets and information available at heretomorrow.org.
To be seen in the company of the illustrious Forsytes, who wouldn't leap at the chance?
Step into late Victorian elegance for a special preview screening of the new PBS series The Forsytes, Tuesday, March 3rd at WJCT Studios. Then settle in for the opening episode of this sweeping drama of love, ambition, and society among one of England's most memorable families. Cocktails at 6 p.m. Program begins at 7. Tickets at wjct.org/events.
Muslim immigrant communities are celebrating Ramadan, but this time with an eye on potential ICE raids.
We're doing a ton of Know Your Rights trainings. We are making ICE safety kits and handing them out at mosque.
This is how people react in these situations for survival. They want to be able to look away and look at other things.
That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
President Donald Trump delivers his State of the Union address on the tail of a Supreme Court decision overturning his tariffs. New polling shows the speech comes as his approval ratings plummet on the economy and immigration. The State of the Union, the Democratic response, and your reaction. Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. The 6-star constellation known as Auriga has been observed as far back as the Bronze Age, but its secrets continue to reveal themselves to cosmologists today. Here to tell us about it is Eddie Whistler, Director of Planetarium and Outreach at the Museum of Science and History. Eddie, good morning.
Hey, good morning. It's always a fun morning.
What is up with Auriga? Why have you got this on the brain right now?
Because it's that time of year, right? If we were to go out tonight, just after the sun goes down and it gets dark enough to start seeing some stars overhead, even in your, don't be right under a street light, but you can get to a darkish part of your neighborhood, look up, and almost directly overhead, there's this awkward looking pentagon that you'll see overhead, and that is Auriga.
So this is something we can see better in the wintertime?
Yeah, because our planet slews around, right? Like it orbits around the sun. And so if you imagine our planet being around the sun, you can't see the stars on the sun side of your planet. But if you wait 6 months, your planet comes around that side of, now on the nighttime side, you're able to see the stars that you weren't able to see 6 months earlier.
Gotcha.
So this is a seasonal thing.
This is the time to see Auriga. Tell us about its kind of mythology. This looks like a pentagon, as you said, but it's actually supposed to represent a charioteer, which it doesn't resemble in the slightest, I'm just going to say.
Oh, let's just say that almost none of them resemble the thing that you want them
Right?
to be, right? But it's weird with Auriga because it contains the sixth brightest star, Capella, and we could talk about Capella if you want. And yet its mythology is not cleaned up. It's very messy. Charioteer, but then also a herdsman of goats. The charioteer has goats as the charioteer's animal.
And it doesn't have a chariot.
Yeah,
It's complicated.
Yeah, it's full of ambiguity historically. Where other ones are straightforward. Orion is the hunter, and he's wearing his belt, and he's got his stories, and so sometimes you get this.
I alluded to the fact that this is a constellation that we're learning more about. We continue to learn more about. What is helping us learn more? Is it just the technology? What's evolving?
Yeah, so I don't know in a historical context how we might be learning more about stories that were told in terms of anthropology, the study of humans long ago telling these stories. But in terms of what is in the constellation, we are making better and better telescopes, and we're utilizing those over the course of years, learning more about the objects that are way deeper out. So if you think of this awkward pentagon as like a frame of a window that, the stars are nearby, relatively speaking. They're impossibly far in one way, but they're relatively close in our neighborhood of stars surrounding our sun, through which we look out way beyond and we find things like clusters of stars that have formed tens of millions of years ago and are loosely separating from each other as they leave the grouping that they were all formed in. We find star-forming regions inside of clouds of dust and gas that are out there. The Tadpole Nebula is a perfect example of one that's inside of this constellation. And then way beyond that, 5 billion light years away, there's a collision of 4 galaxy clusters that are supermassive, and astronomers use them in a lot of different ways to talk about the larger structure. So there's things that are nearby, the stars that make up the constellation, and then there are the things that are further out in our own galaxy, like star-forming regions and open clusters, and then there are the things that we look way far out and we see happening on intergalactic scales.
And so there are advanced technologies, better telescopes that allow us to see farther, but there's also something that you've talked about called gravitational lensing. How does that work in the context of this constellation?
The 22nd version.
That's all I have time for.
Yep. These massive galaxies sit on space and time and bend light the same way that a lens bends light, right? You hold it up and now you can magnify a thing. These gravitational lenses act like magnifiers before they get to our telescope, so they allow us to see things even farther out. So this gigantic structure, 5 billion light years away, bends light so that we can see the galaxies that are 10 billion light years away much better than we normally would. You have a lens before it gets to the telescope, so that's powerful.
Eddie, you always make our brains kind of half explode.
And then when it recovers, it's so much better.
It is
right?
better. It's sort
like
of
working out like that.
Yeah, it is sort of like a muscle that's getting stronger every time we see you every month. Eddie Whistler, we can see you around town at places. Is there a place coming up?
Yeah, like this afternoon, I'm going to Wyndham Lakes. I'm in retirement communities. I'm in schools. I was just at a school a couple of days ago. And I'm out and about during summer camps and stuff like that.
Pending the next planetarium.
Pending the next planetarium. And then you can come see me. And then we'll keep going out to people, even when we have that planetarium, because why not?
Eddie Whistler, thank you so much for coming on today.
You're super welcome. I love it.
All right. That's our program. Thanks for listening. If you have comments or questions, you can send either. You actually find a place to put them at firstcoastconnect.org. You can also sign up for our new daily newsletter. Join us tomorrow when we discuss the Blacksonville 100 and talk to Jacksonville Today reporter Will Brown about compiling a list of leaders who shaped local history. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. Florida Theater presents Celtic Woman. The 4 Irish vocalists will perform classic and modern songs accompanied by dancers and an ensemble featuring traditional Celtic instruments. Sunday, March 29th at 7 p.m. Tickets and information available at floridatheater.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
President Trump addresses Congress and the nation, previewing a run-up to the midterms, all while voters lose confidence in his presidency. From WAMU and NPR in Washington, this is 1A. Hi, I'm Jen White. President Trump delivered the longest State of the Union speech in U.S. history Tuesday night. It sounded like this.
You've seen nothing yet. We're going to do better and better and better. This is the golden age of America.
And this.
Biden and his corrupt partners in Congress and beyond, it reached a breaking point with the Green New scam, open borders for everyone.
So what did we learn about the direction of our country and Trump's priorities as we head toward November? And we want to hear how you see the state of our union. Call us at 855-236-1212.